So you're trying to keep up. You want to know what's really going on, but let's face it, there's just so much noise out there. It's easy to get overloaded.
Totally. And that's kind of where we step in, right? We do the sifting, find the important threads in all the detail, and, well, bring the core insights straight to you. Saves time, saves the headache.
Exactly. And today, we're really digging into something happening right now, the whole U.S.-India trade relationship. It's pretty dynamic.
Definitely. We've pulled together quite a range of stuff. The Economic Times, NDTV, India Briefing, CBS News, passport shipping.
Official statements, too, from India's Ministry of External Affairs, and even some analysis off Substack. So a good mix.
And the timing, well, it couldn't be more relevant, could it? U.S. Vice President JD Vance is actually in India right now.
Right, and his visit is happening during this sort of temporary ceasefire on the trade front, this 90-day pause on threatened tariff hikes.
Which sets the stage perfectly.
So our mission for this deep dive, pull out the key bits from all these reports. We want to understand, where do these trade talks actually stand? Who are the main people involved?
And what could it all mean for the economic future between these two, well, huge global players?
Okay, so with all that ground to cover, where should we kick things off?
I think to really get it, we need to understand the lead-up. Why this pause? Why is Vance visiting now? The context is crucial.
Good point. Let's rewind then. President Trump, he brought in these reciprocal tariffs globally. India was part of that. By April this year, Indian goods coming into the U.S. were looking at a 26% tariff.
And that was on top of an existing baseline, a 10% tariff on most imports.
Right, though. Important exception, pharmaceuticals seem to get a pass on that broader 10% one.
Yeah. And the U.S. reasoning behind pushing these tariffs, specifically on India, it was largely about the trade deficit, which was widening.
And also concerns from the U.S. side about what they saw as, let's say, uneven trade practices. Not quite reciprocal.
Which brings us right up to this key moment, the 90-day pause. That pause on hiking the tariff from 10% up to that threatened 26%. That's huge.
It kicked in early April, runs until July 9th. So like you said, it just opens this critical negotiating window.
It really does. And it's interesting, looking at how others are reading this. Reports suggest, Chinese analysts, for instance, they're watching Vance's visit. But they seem pretty skeptical that it's going to fundamentally change India's tariff situation or its overall trade approach.
That's fascinating, especially, when you think about the U.S.-China trade picture. That passport shipping source mentions some Chinese tariffs go up to, 125%?
Exactly. Puts the threatened 26% for India into perspective, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It highlights the complex global game India's playing.
Right. So let's pivot to Vance's visit itself.
Yeah.
The sources are hinting it's maybe a bit more than just your standard diplomatic trip.
Yeah, I saw that too. 4 days, April 21st to 24th. And the Economic Times and NDTV both noted his family is with him, which some reports are framing as giving it this blend of personal and political significance.
And India's Ministry of External Affairs, they officially flagged the visit too, saying it's a chance to review progress in the whole bilateral relationship.
Key meetings planned, of course, especially with Prime Minister Modi, discussions expected on the economy, trade, geopolitics, the whole package.
And the Trump administration itself, they're definitely calling it an important diplomatic mission.
But there's also this other angle, this potential for softer diplomacy, maybe?
Yeah.
Because the family's there, reportedly engaging with Indian culture.
There were those reports about his kids arriving in traditional Indian dress.
Exactly. That kind of thing.
And look, that personal touch, it can sometimes help, can't it? Build a bit of goodwill, maybe make the tougher talks flow a bit easier.
Potentially. Okay, so let's get into the real meat of it now, the trade negotiations themselves. What's actually happening? What's the timeline?
Well, according to the Economic Times, talks on a bilateral trade agreement, a BTA, they've been ongoing since March 2025. And a big step, apparently, is that they've finalized the terms of reference.
Which is like the roadmap for the talks, right? The scope.
Pretty much, yeah. It covers about 19 chapters, things like tariffs, obviously, but also goods, non-tariff barriers, making customs smoother, a whole range of things.
So having that framework agreed upon is, well, that's progress.
Definitely. And they seem keen to use this 90-day pause.
Looks like it. Reports said an Indian delegation was due in Washington starting April 23rd for 3 days of face-to-face talks.
Trying to hash out some key issues while the tariff threat is on hold.
Makes sense. And the overall goal seems pretty ambitious.
Very. The idea is to wrap up phase 1 of this BTA by what, fall 2025?
Yeah, and the bigger picture, the longer-term aim, is to more than double trade. Get it up to $500 billion by 2030.
Which is a massive jump from the current level, around $190 billion.
Huge jump. And interestingly, India's done this sort of phased trade deal before, hasn't it? Like with Australia.
That's right. So they have some experience with this kind of approach, which might help here.
Could do. Okay, so let's talk sticking points and potential wins. Where are the main areas of disagreement, and where might they find common ground?
Okay. So the U.S. side, they seem focused on getting tariffs down on industrial goods. Things like cars, especially EVs, wines, petrochemicals, dairy products too, and certain agricultural goods, apples, nuts, alfalfa hay were mentioned.
Right. And India, what are their key asks?
India seems to be pushing for duty cuts in sectors where they employ a lot of people. So think apparel, textiles, gems, and jewelry.
Okay.
Leather, plastics, chemicals, oil seeds, shrimp, horticulture. These are big export earners and job creators for India.
But you mentioned earlier it's not just about tariffs.
No, definitely not. These non-tariff barriers seem to be a major hurdle, things like India's data localization rules.
Which means companies have to store data inside India, right?
Yeah, essentially. Plus, local content requirements needing to use a certain amount of Indian-made parts, for instance. And intellectual property rights are always sensitive, especially around pharmaceutical patents.
Always a tricky area.
And agriculture is another really complex one. The U.S. wants more market access, clearly.
But India's got to protect its farmers. That's a huge domestic constituency.
Exactly. It's a very delicate balance.
Though we did mention pharmaceuticals got some tariff exemptions earlier, which you could see as a win for India, given their pharma industry strength.
Absolutely. That's a significant point.
Yeah.
Okay. Shifting gears slightly, what about India's overall game plan here? What's their strategy and what's really at stake for them?
Well, the reports suggest they're taking a proactive approach. Trying to engineer a win-win is how they seem to be framing it.
Yeah.
Definitely trying to avoid a trade war.
Which makes sense given the potential downsides.
And they might have some leverage, right? India's share of total U.S. trade isn't as massive as some others, but their consumer market, that's a huge draw for U.S. companies.
A very big draw. Plus, getting this BTA locked down would help protect their exports from future tariff threats, wouldn't it?
For sure. And it fits with their wider goal of diversifying supply chains, not being too reliant on any one country.
And there's also the competitiveness angle. A good deal could boost India's position in global trade.
And then there's the whole geopolitical side of things. A strong U.S.-India trade deal, well, that strengthens their partnership in the Indo-Pacific.
Countering China's influence, many would argue.
Right. It all ties together, the economics and the strategy.
It really does. So, thinking about the potential outcomes, what are the economic ripples we could see, good or bad?
Well, the bad news first. If there's no deal and those higher tariffs kick back in after July 9th, sectors like gems and jewelry, textiles, petrochemicals in India could really feel the pain. They've been flagged as vulnerable.
But on the flip side, a successful deal. The potential upside is pretty big.
Definitely. That surge in trade we talked about, maybe $300 billion by 2028, or hitting that $500 billion by 2030 target.
And that would likely pull in more foreign investment, too.
You'd think so, but there's a catch, right? The reports warn about uncertainty.
Yes, if these negotiations drag on, or look like they might fail, that could spook investors.
Yeah, businesses hate uncertainty. It could potentially put a drag on India's GDP growth.
That stability, that predictability you get from a solid trade agreement, it's often as valuable as the actual tariff cuts.
Good point. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main things people should take away from all this?
I think the headline is, U.S.-India trade is at a really pivotal moment. Trump's tariff policies definitely set the stage. And this 90-day pause has just created this intense pressure cooker for negotiation. Vance's visit happening right now just highlights the high-level focus, the urgency to try and make some real headway on a trade deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully listening to this, you've got a clearer picture of what's a pretty complex situation. You can see how the economics and the geopolitics are all tangled up together.
Exactly. Which leaves us with maybe a final thought to chew on, considering all the competing interests we've discussed, the different priorities, the real hurdles still there. What do you think is the most likely way these high-stakes talks will actually end up? And whatever that outcome is, what kind of long-term ripple effect could it have, not just for the U.S. and India, but for the wider global economy?
Definitely something to think about.